In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Today, June 30th, we celebrate the Synaxis of the Holy Apostles. And the Synaxis means the gathering in. So as a group, we commemorate all the Holy Apostles. And you just heard the whole list of them. And you notice that at the very last one was Judas Iscariot who betrayed him. And Judas committed suicide after Christ's crucifixion. And then we've had, well, how do we fill out the 12? Because remember, 12 comes from, it's a sort of what they call a whole number, something that's complete when you have 12 of things. For among other reasons, the 12 patriarchs of the tribes of Israel. 12 months in a year. All different reasons why the number 12 represents the fullness of something. And so after Christ's ascension into heaven, they picked two men and cast lots to see which one of them would fill the place, and Methodios was chosen. But when you look at the icons of the 12 apostles, like we have a smaller one over here after church, you might take a minute to look at it, and you'll notice that right down in front is the Apostle Paul. And he has a very unique look. He's always shown bald-headed with just a tiny little wisp of hair, usually up top, sort of like me. And so the question is, well, is it Matthias or is it Paul that completes the 12? And for earthly reasons, Matthias was necessary to be chosen at the beginning. But notice the other 11 were all chosen by Jesus Christ himself. And Matthias wasn't chosen by Jesus Christ himself. He was selected from the group by the other apostles, and then they cast lots, and now they believe that the reason they cast the lots to decide is that they believed that the Holy Spirit would guide the dice, or the knuckle bones, or whatever it is they were tossing, and that the Holy Spirit would influence the selection. And that's why they chose it by lot. And that's still the practice today among the Orthodox churches, that typically when you need a new bishop, you'll put 3 names in the ring, and you'll draw out a name written on a piece of paper, and it's by lot. The Holy Spirit is supposed to guide the hand of whoever is dipping their hand into the pot to pull out one of these names. He's supposed to be guided by the Holy Spirit. That's the ideal. It doesn't always happen. So Matthias, until Paul, fulfilled the 12. But Paul, you remember, he was struck this great vision on the road to Damascus. And this voice said, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And Paul said, "Well, who are you?" And Saul says, the voice says, "I'm Jesus whom you crucified." And then he gave him the directions that we're all familiar with that story. He goes in Damascus, and it has the scales removed from his eyes. So that is Christ personally picking Paul. And that's why when we see the icon of the 12 apostles, we see Paul front and center, along with Peter and all the rest. Another thing that you notice when you look at the icon is some of these are gray-haired men. And some of them are unshaven youths. And then there's some in the middle, dark hair, some beards. So he's picking not just a council of elders, but a group of people who will carry forth his message. And we assume that he's picking them because he sees into their heart and knows how they're going to act if they are called upon to be set aside. Right? In the biggest trouble in this world, someone gets a little position, and the next thing you know, they want to lord it over everybody. And what did Christ say? It's not going to be like that with you. You're not going to lord it over everybody. If you're going to be the first, you got to be the last. You know, when Peter said, "You're not going to wash my feet," Christ says, "If I don't wash your feet, you have no place with me." And Peter immediately realizes how he himself has, sinned against Christ, sinned against what Christ was doing. And he's restored many times, 3 times. So this is this group of people. And notice they are sent out. Okay? Jesus doesn't go to the 5,000 people that he gave the loaves and fishes to. He doesn't go to the 4,000 that he fed with the 7 baskets. He goes to the 12 and says, you go. And that's a commissioning. And that's what makes them apostles. Not just believers, because there's many other believers. Not just disciples, because that meant students. And there was many of them, because think back to the story I just told you about Matthias. When it was time to replace Judas, they said, let us pick someone who's been with us from the beginning. So there's this whole group of people, we don't know how many, because they're not named, but they have been with Christ from the beginning, or we wouldn't have been able to select Matthias out of them. So, but they're not the ones chosen. Okay? The 12 are chosen. And then notice what happens. At Pentecost, they're all together. Right? They all receive the Holy Spirit together. And then they stay in Jerusalem. Right? They don't immediately go off to the ends of the earth, creating their own separate churches with their own separate ways of doing things. They stay together, and they hold everything in common, and they do everything together. In fact, the 12 are doing so much, they realize we got so many people now that are trying to follow Christ that we need deacons. We can't do all this ourselves. 12 people's not enough. We need more. And so they ordain the deacons. Again, out of this group of people, that was a bigger group that was following Christ. And then the book of Acts talks about the people held everything in common, and they broke bread, and the doctrine of the apostles. So the doctrine of the apostles was a group thing that they all shared, because they all shared the revelation of Jesus Christ in the flesh. They all were there at his crucifixion and his ascension. And it's only after some time that the disciples have to leave Jerusalem. And why did they have to leave Jerusalem? Well, Herod decides that these guys are troublemakers. And so he executes James, the brother of John, son of Zebedee. And all the people, all the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees say, that's a good thing. Let's kill some more of these guys. And so that causes the people to scatter. And they draw lots again, thinking to be guided by the Holy Spirit. And they go in every different direction that they can find to preach the gospel. That's how we know that Thomas went to India. That was his lot chosen, that he was to go to India. It's not because he had an Indian grandmother or something. Okay? And so everybody goes everywhere. And except for John the theologian, they're all martyred in some way. Crucified, beheaded, stoned. And you'd have to think, many people, when they're trying to denounce Christianity, saying, oh, these guys just made all this up because they wanted the power, right? Think about this. How much power is there in death? Well, we know from Christ there's great power in death, but to the world there's no power in death. That's why we have to remember that selection that we read out of the Old Testament that some people who call themselves Christians have taken away. And it says they think it to be a great calamity, but they are with God. That's who the apostles are. They are with God. And the reason why John the theologian wasn't martyred is that they saw that every time they martyr one of these guys, the faith just grows stronger. And they say, let's quit doing this. And so John is, in a way, he's martyred because he's sent into exile. And in those days, being sent into exile meant that you're cut off from all your friends, all your family, no one who could provide for you. And John was sent to a little island called Patmos, off the coast of what's now Turkey, off the coast of Asia Minor. And it's very hard to get to today, and it was very hard to get to then. And so even though he stayed on this little island, and he did attract some monks that followed him, it wasn't like he was living in a great place physically. Many people died. St. John Chrysostom, whose liturgy we're celebrating, he was sent into exile because the empress didn't like the fact that he was calling out her sin. And so she sent him in exile, and he died in just a couple years because it was harsh living. That's how John was treated. We're not going to kill you because we know what happens when we kill you guys, but we're going to treat you as if you were dead. Your people aren't going to be able to join back with you. those of you who are of a certain age will remember what we call now the Watergate scandal. And here was people working with the President of the United States who burglarized the office of the Democratic National Party in Washington, D.C. in the Watergate Hotel. And they were caught in the act. The people that were hired were caught in the act. But then the group of men around the president who had ordered this and then were trying to cover it up, when they started being called out, they couldn't hold it together for even a couple of weeks. And Chuck Colson, one of those people, was convinced about truth of Christianity because of that. Because here, he said, here was the most powerful men on the earth, and we couldn't hold it together for 2 weeks. How could 12 men hold it together even through their death over years and years and years? So he was convinced by what he saw in his own life that Christianity is true, and if it wasn't true, these men wouldn't have gone to their death. Maybe James, the first one. But when you see that these guys are starting to get killed, why are you going to be number 11 if this is not the truth? This is the truth. And that's why I remember these 12 apostles brought together here on this one day to remember together that we might understand where our faith comes from. It comes from Jesus Christ, who taught the apostles, and the apostles in turn taught others, some of whom were called bishops, some were called presbyters or elders, some were called deacons. But we're all follow in the footsteps of the apostles because they were commissioned by Christ to bring the faith to all the world. The prayers of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ our God, have mercy upon us and save us. Amen.